It's fine. Wait.
Well, don't mind it all starting. I appreciate you taking the time today, Thomas. Hi, I'm Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We're here today, and let me see if I can. I don't usually. There I am. Okay. I'm the founder of Global Chamber, and one of the things that those of us that have been involved with trade for a long time think about is tariffs and trade barriers and all the things that are in our way. And we are always looking for ways to simplify things. And when you're in a supply chain, that's really important. You want to be as efficient as you can. Well, that process has been working in the world for decades. Things have been improving. There have been trade deals that have improved our lives. USMCA, NAFTA before that were instrumental in getting companies and people to work together. In Africa, the transformation with AFCFTA and what that's doing to get people to think about how we can collaborate and cooperate across countries is essential for progress. There are, however, some things that are happening that are hurting that, and that's certainly the tariff situation. And so, when you're in a supply chain, you're looking for things to improve, to be more resilient, to be more sustainable as a supply chain. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is navigating tariffs and general disruption. There are other things that are disrupting besides tariffs, and I can't think of a better expert to speak to about that than Thomas Cook. He's the managing director of Blue Tiger International. He's got deep expertise in trade. He's been helping big companies and other companies be successful to navigate all of the different things that can be in the way to be able to be successful. And so Thomas, there are a few things in our way today. I'm sure you'll be covering some of those, certainly the important ones, and giving us some things to think about in terms of ways out, ways to be better, ways to improve. So thank you for your knowledge and your leadership. Thank you for taking the time today to educate us. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Doug. And listen, I appreciate all that you do in running the chamber and your outreach for the whole globe and bringing us all together at these various webinars and events that you run and everything is very important. So hats off to you and the organization. So, Doug, I just wanted to mention if somebody wants to ask a question or comment during the presentation, it's okay with me if you just control that through the chat group. That would be good. That okay?
That sounds great.
Good. Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you for joining. So I run a company called Blue Tiger International. We've been around for more than 30 years now, and we basically help companies navigate all the challenges of global trade. We've been doing tariff mitigation for more than that time frame. And so a lot of the solutions that we brought back in the late 1980s, we're using on steroids today with all the events that are taking place. But as Doug mentioned, there are lots of challenges that we face on top of the tariffs that we have, and we're going to talk about that. But one of the things that the concept of this is that we have to look at things from an intellectual perspective and drop them down to where that intellectual perspective turns into operational solutions. And that's what I really want to bring to the table here is not just framing all the issues that we have to deal with, but as we get towards the second half of the presentation, it's really focused on solutions, things that companies can do to, mitigate all the complexities of global trade, particularly tariffs, and really at the end of the day, create resilience in the supply chain. So I start out in this conversation by kind of just defining it, but I've highlighted the yellow areas in here, recognizing first of all that resilience is a focus and develops around the complex network of international suppliers, manufacturers, and logistics companies. Okay. and have that appreciation in mind. That's a huge amount of companies and individuals located 10, 12,000 miles from each other, trying to coordinate activity that makes sense for all the parties. And at the end of the day, work successfully from a profit standpoint. It involves proactively managing risk. And in order to manage risk, you have to understand what risks you have. Okay. And you have to prioritize the risks, which ones need to be dealt with today because the impact is going to be felt today, and which ones have to be managed in a longer term period. Looking at the concept of diversification, particularly of our sourcing portfolio. The fact is anticipating what risks we're going to have and problems and contingency planning. Technology and the importance of technology in the supply chain, creating real-time visibility, and the collaboration that takes place among all the parties that are involved in the supply chain. And some supply chains could have as many as 20 individual transactions involved to move goods from point A to point B. We have natural disasters, we have pandemics, we have geopolitical events. And the idea of resilience is not only being able to survive that period of time and these complications, but actually soar up and prosper in the face of all those challenges and the environment. Sustainability has more to do with managing environmental, social, economic impacts across the entire network of suppliers. But a lot of companies, particularly through COVID, and now facing the dilemma of all these tariffs that are coming at us at 90 miles an hour, sustainability isn't as important of an issue as it once was prior to the period of COVID. But it does still hold water for many different types of companies, and it involves incorporating principles and policies to reduce waste, ethical labor practices, and always appreciating the supply chain, particularly for imports into the United States and into Western Europe. Labor practices, forced labor issues around the world, companies that are engaged in forced labor become a major problem for the United States and Western countries because we have prohibitions against forced labor being used in the supply chain and us sourcing from and buying from companies in that circumstance. And at the end of the day, it's a responsible process of sourcing from product design all the way through to delivery to customers. So when we think about the complexity and the challenge, appreciate that while there are generic challenges that we all face, every company has its own culture that impacts resilience and sustainability practices. The general challenges of global trade are continually disruptive, and add in now the disruption caused by President Trump and his administration, okay, tied into all these other exposures and challenges that we have. To try to balance resiliency and sustainability in a company is significantly much more complicated. So I'd like to identify what I think are characteristics of personnel who operate in the supply chain and create sustainable and resilient strategies. First of all, the supply chain has to have top-notch supply chain management personnel. And one of the good factors that came out of COVID is that supply chain and the importance of supply chain was elevated in the world, which meant that people who work in the supply chain, particularly the top level people in the supply chain, they were elevated as well. And we now see, besides a chief executive officer and a chief financial officer, chief information officer, right? But we're now seeing a chief supply chain officer, meaning they have a seat at the table now for the first time historically. And this is very important, okay? That team, that person, the group that's involved in the supply chain within a company, their ability to integrate ethics into the operational decision making, that's the sustainability side. The individuals have a can-do mindset. Yes, we have challenges, we have exposures, but it's not to dredge on the issue of the problem, but more that there are solutions available. And towards the end, I'm going to go through a bunch of them. Knowing how to pivot. I mean, this is an important thing. I come out of the military, and the thing that we were trained all the time for was dealing with circumstances as they change. And if you want to survive in the heat of the battle, you have to be able to pivot very quickly in what you do, what action you take. And it's no different in the supply chain. Understanding the similarity and difference between elimination of an issue and the mitigation of it. And I emphasize that mitigation really outweighs elimination, because elimination generally is not possible in most circumstances, but you can reduce the impacts of the challenges. You have to know how to negotiate. I can't tell you that skill set for anybody involved in supply chain management and business in general. You can't weigh its value enough. Knows when to compromise and when to hold fast. That's part of the negotiation strategy. Having significant numbers and very prominent resources, such as the Global Chamber, which is a significant resource in international business, okay, to bring value to you, because there's no one person in the supply chain who has answers to all the problems and questions. So having resources to support that is critical. Has a risk management mindset. And one of the things in supply chain that came out of COVID that was positive was the fact that now risk management in the supply chain became an important topic. Okay. And that ties directly into the last point made here, which is that we've learned not to chase cost, but to negotiate for the best value for your spend. And I'll say that again. We want to not chase cost, but to negotiate for the best value of spend. Those characteristics, when we can build them into the personnel and the management teams in a supply chain, help us to minimize risk in our supply chain, create better value, develop better relationships with vendors and suppliers, allow a faster change management. And at the end of the day, in all corporations, it always comes down to money, is it protects the financial side of sales, growth, and margins, which is usually the most critical issues in most companies. So when we look at just challenges in general, okay, that we face, and every company has another whole unique list that's more important or relevant to them. But you have geopolitical issues, you have economic issues, wars and terrorism, and a lot of them are distant in foreign lands, right? You take the Hamas-Israeli problem that has been over the last 2.5, 3 years, but how does that affect the international community? Well, think about the Houthis who are in Yemen, who are part of this terrorist network in the Middle East that started to bomb ships that were coming to and from Asia, going through the Red Sea and into the Suez Canal, to cut off about 2 to 3 weeks of transit time rather than going around the Cape of Africa. And their bombing of the ships caused the whole maritime industry commercially to take a different route, which not only added 2 to 3 weeks time, but added anywhere per container from $200 to $400 per container of additional cost in the transportation mode. Economic issues, weather, hazards of international shipping, bad players in international trade. U.S. customs, when we're importing here in the United States, is always a huge challenge, and appreciate for those of us involved in exporting. The foreign customs in countries all around the world also create a significant row of challenges. But the big challenge of today, and the most important focus that most companies and executives in supply chain are dealing with today, relate to President Trump and his administration. So we have all the same issues that we have day to day, but now the methodology that Trump is using has caused a significant amount of uncertainty, a high level of chaos, a high level of disruption. Okay. Bad reciprocity. As an example, in him going after China, China is now restricting and putting quotas on the sales of contract minerals, okay, and critical materials into the United States. Okay. So reciprocity hurts us. Again, China has raised the tariffs on US products going into China, and China is a huge market for the United States. Okay. And it's forced significant amount of new alliances to occur. I'll look at one of those in a moment. But keep in mind what happens in the United States, which is really the center of global trade, okay, impacts the entire world. One of the alliances that the United States is looking at very cautiously is what's referred to as BRIC, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And whether or not they're actually going to be successful as a trade group remains to be seen, but appreciate the fact that the group of them, their economy is significantly larger than the United States by itself. and mirrors almost the economy of Europe, the Euro nations, Great Britain, and the United States. They're trying to control trade differently than it's handled currently, and they're trying to take the dollar away from being the currency of the world. That would be hugely impactful in a negative way to the United States. So you have these alliances that are taking place all over the world. Militarily, we're very concerned about the Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China alignment, okay, from a military standpoint. So we have these allegiances that we have to be concerned with as well. At the end of the day, when we look at what our president is doing, the goals actually have some merit. And the two primary goals he has is to create reciprocity. And the best way to look at this as an example is that if BMW in Germany was selling a car that was manufactured in Germany into the United States, when that car passed through the border into the United States, there would be a 2.5% duty rate that the company would pay. If General Motors, Chevrolet, was now to sell one of their cars made in the United States into Germany, they would encounter a 17.5% duty and VAT rate that they would have to pay. So appreciate the fact we have lots of BMWs all over the United States. There are not many Chevrolets at all in Germany. And that concept of less reciprocity exists all over the world, that US products going into foreign markets pays a significantly more amount of money than those foreign countries that sell into the United States. So Trump is using tariffs to negotiate more favorable trade relationships with all the countries around the world. And in fact, more than 100 countries have already begun the negotiations, many very successfully, in lowering their tariffs on US products. And secondly, he's looking for more foreign investment in the United States, either by building factories here, making investments in companies, or buying more from the United States than they are currently. And Department of Commerce is making the point that as much as $1 trillion of additional money has come into the United States since Trump took office as a result of those initiatives and efforts. But putting that all aside, what I would call goals that are meritorious, his process of how he's handling it has created all this chaos and disruption because he's not giving us significant amount of time to adjust and to pivot with the changes that are made. When he came out recently, just that there was going to be additional charges and tariffs on trucks that were manufactured overseas, he gave us 6 days to respond. It's nowhere not sufficient. Most people in supply chain minimally would need 6 months to respond to most circumstances. So that has continued. And I asked a senior Department of Commerce officer, when will this settle down and how long will it occur? And his response to me was, how much more term does Trump have? Meaning he has at least 3.5 years left, which means that that's how he expects there can be continuation of these efforts. So when we look at this and the challenges, the first is, if I'm a purchasing manager, where am I going to source from? The duty today might be 15%, but tomorrow it might be 25%. The duty today, as an example in China, depending upon what you buy, if it has steel, aluminum, or copper in it, the duty rate could be 170% aggregated. Okay. So where do we plan our purchasing? And I appreciate we're always thinking in advance, minimally 6 months, as much as a year, and sometimes 2 years in advance. But when things are changing so quickly in global trade, so it's pretty tough to be making decisions when you have the environment changing in global trade daily. The demand planning process, right? What day do I have to place an order and for how much to make sure we have enough supply and inventory to meet our customer or manufacturing needs? It's a big question when you have all this level of uncertainty. Companies involved in building their export markets and making foreign investments around the world, where do we pick locations around when our relationships is changing so dynamically with all these areas and countries around the world, which ties into foreign investments. And lastly, controlling costs, right? Which we're all always trying to do to keep our margin at certain levels, okay, is controlling our costs. Everybody in the supply chain has that as a responsibility. So going back all the way to the late 1980s, we started out our team and we created 4 or 5 solutions. And here we are in 2025, and we now have 20 solutions, and we're beta testing a 21st solution as we speak right now, which we will bring out into the marketplace as soon as we feel that it's well vetted and qualified. So the list of solutions here is pretty robust. And generally, when I take the time to go through that, it takes almost 2 hours to go through that kind of list, and we don't have that kind of time here. So I picked a few areas that I think I highlighted here that I think are important that I'm going to kind of go into at a deeper level. So we have foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses. Okay, we have tariff engineering. Okay, we have first sale options, how we manage our demand planning and forecasting, and the last concept of nearshoring or reshoring. So I'm going to go into all these examples in a few moments, but I want to just set the stage for doing that so you understand how we think through the recommendations we make to companies after we do an analysis and assessment of how their supply chain specifically runs. The first thing we look at is we set up 5 specific pillars of the supply chain. In this case, we're looking at an import coming into the United States, but this could be an import going into any country around the world, the same kind of modeling. You have the acquisition of the product, the cost associated with the product. That's what we negotiate. It's generally dependent upon market conditions and the quantity that we're willing to purchase. Then we have the cost of freight to move it from that manufacturing or distribution site to the point of value in our supply chain. As it comes through the border, everywhere around the world, there's a customs clearance process, and that process has costs attached to it. The government is going to collect duties, taxes, VAT, and other charges as the goods come through the border. Okay, appreciate that around the world, customs is a big source of revenue going into the treasury of all the countries around the world. In the United States, we go back all the way to 1789 when our country was just formed. Okay, the first government agency, even before there was a military, was U.S. Customs because the country needed money to operate so they could start to collect duties right away. So if you go into any customs office around the United States, you'll see a sign over the door that says the first U.S. agency in the federal government. And lastly, once we have freight positioned that we've imported into our country, we have the inland freight, warehousing, last mile, fulfillment, distribution, all these various services that also add cost in our supply chain. So we silo these areas because we can then look at what strategies within each of these areas that we can develop, okay, potential solutions. Taking this further, what we've done is taken and created a 4-step process. And the 4-step process looks at first assessment of the supply chain, understanding both intellectually and operationally how that supply chain runs. What potential solutions and recommendations can be made, and financial modeling those recommendations to make sure that we understand what the costs are involved in the change and what's the ROI. That leads us to the 3rd step, which is generally the longest of the 4 steps, which is the operational model. This is working with purchasing, sales, customer service, manufacturing, distribution, demand planning, people. And what we're answering here is, what does the company have to do differently in applying this recommendation into its supply chain? And then once we sort out those first 3, we get into implementation. And the general time frame from the time we start to assess to where we get into the implementation mode is generally between 60 and 90 days and can go out to about 180 days, depending upon the complications and complexity of the supply chain. The 4-step process that we've established allows for us to use both quantitative, hard data, and qualitative, which is our experience and our sensibilities that we have in how things should move forward. It allows us to have an organized and a consistent approach to that decision-making process, okay? Provides a solid grounding for it. And our process, which has been tweaked all the time, has over really 30 years of success in global supply chain. The challenges to all that and people involved in supply chain is one is having a lack of resources. And I think that's one of the great things about the Global Chamber and what Doug is doing is he's bringing all these resources to the membership and to all the people around the world that belong to the chamber that's potentially available to them to help them run their operations more better and more responsibly. Time and initiative. Anything's going to take time and initiative. Managing up, right? We have to bring these ideas up the line to CEOs and CFOs of our company. And sometimes that's a very difficult task depending upon how a company is structured. Sometimes a lot of the projects, the financial model, when it's done, doesn't really support the decision. It's not an overwhelming benefit to go through all the process of making the change. You might have operational roadblocks and a lot of the suggestions that I'm going to go into, some of the recommendations, one of the big roadblocks is a company not having really good technology in their supply chain makes a lot of the solutions a lot more difficult. And lastly is awareness, is that a lot of times, particularly people on the operational level of the supply chain, they come to work each day, they put their head down and they get things done. They move freight from A to B, they manufacture, they distribute, and sometimes they don't come up for air to see what options are out there. Okay, so they're just not aware of the things that they can bring to the benefit of their organization. So some of the upcoming difficult and anticipated challenges tied into this is the reciprocity around the world and how they're acting and reacting to what President Trump and his administration is doing. The alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, and China is still moving forward and aggressively in trying to capture more of the world trade and control it, particularly by changing dollar as the international means of exchange. Trump's executive orders, unfortunately, when they come out, he doesn't follow the normal protocols, so they're ambiguous. Sometimes they're technically not correct. So there's a lot of going back and forth with customs and the White House and trying to figure out how to apply the changes that he's making. Another thing is a lot of companies get stagnated by the issues. They're not sure which choice to put into place, and therefore a competitor moves first and more aggressively, and they take advantage of the change before a company that's stagnated doesn't. And lastly, is recognize that customs, particularly here in the United States, as well as in other countries, has ramped up their enforcement of customs regulations, import regulations, much more intensely than they ever had before. As an example of this ramping up, bills of materials are being asked for now by U.S. Customs, where they normally would ask for a copy of a bill of lading, a commercial invoice, and a packing list. They're now asking for a bill of materials, and they want in that bill of materials, where does the parts and components come from, and what's the percentage of those parts against the total, right? So particularly in Mexico and Vietnam, the big concern is it really made in Mexico? Is it really made in Vietnam? When it's really just a shift of a Chinese company moving their manufacturing to Vietnam or to Mexico. Okay, so this becomes a big challenge now. They're looking specifically at valuation, origin, and HTS number. Okay, and again, I highlight, always keep in mind what happens in the US will be followed by many countries. As we're ramping up customs control, so are many European countries and Asian countries as well. And here in the United States, a task force has been established between U.S. Customs, Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice to particularly watch out for fraud in the import supply chain. And since 1993, and when we had a period of time which was called the Customs Modernization period from 1993 all the way till about 2 months ago, U.S. Customs called themselves trade facilitators. Trump has ended that terminology, It now says they are an enforcement agency of the federal government, okay, which is culturally changing what they stand for and primarily involved in the enforcement of import regulations and the movement of as much money as possible into the U.S. Treasury. They've also redefined errors and mistakes and now are allocating the fact that the Department of Justice can go after an importer, even if it appears to be just a mistake because they were not aware or they weren't familiar with the regulation. On the export side of business, where the U.S. government, particularly Department of Commerce, Department of State, and Treasury, are looking at what countries we're selling to and putting more restrictions in, looking at who the individual consignees are and putting more restrictions in. They're increasing the names on the denied parties list of companies and individuals we can engage with, both on the import and export side. The utilization of the products in countries is being evaluated. Transshipping, where we send something to Spain and then it moves on a transshipment into Iran. And license and scrutiny, because a lot of products require an export license, not only from the United States, but from lots of countries around the world. There's a lot more scrutiny by foreign governments and the U.S. government in issuing those licenses. So the challenges are huge and complex. Some are uncontrollable, okay, and they're changing frequently, but we still in the supply chain have to create that level of resilience and sustainability. And that's where we have to have qualitative considerations, which is our mindset, creativity, persistence, establishing alliances, resources, effective communications, managing up the line, understanding mitigation versus elimination. And then there are the quantitative measures, the hard data, the action steps that we take based on sound founded decisions, taking time and initiative to gain information and knowledge, working on the 20 solutions that we're going to talk a little bit about now, and developing specific resources. So one of the suggestions of the 20 is the use of bonded warehouses and foreign trade zones. They exist all over the world, not just here in the United States. And the primary benefit that a company gets when they move goods as it crosses the border into a bonded location or a foreign trade zone is that there's no obligation to do a customs clearance, and therefore there's no obligation to pay duties. So you get a first benefit of the deferral of that duty until the goods exit the bonded or the foreign trade zone location. In a bonded facility, you can hold the freight in there for 5 years before it has to move. But if it goes in as a widget, it has to come out as a widget. In a bonded location, you can't materially change the product. In a foreign trade zone, you have an unlimited amount of time that you can keep the product in the location, okay? And you are allowed to do manipulation. You're allowed to take components and parts and bring them together to make a finished product. The parts and components come in at one particular duty rate, and that's the duty rate as of today. That has to be declared to U.S. Customs. There's an ability to do tariff inversion, okay, which has been temporarily suspended by Trump here in the United States. Still exists in foreign trade zones in other countries, but the tariff inversion benefit will come back. And when it comes back, what it does allow is to take advantage of the fact that parts and components and raw materials come in as a higher duty rate than finished products. So we can also get in a foreign trade zone the benefit of tariff inversion. There's also benefits for customs clearance charges and merchandise processing fee, harbor maintenance fees, and so forth. The FTZs are bonded warehouses on steroids and provide a huge amount of advantages. We have about 27, 28 projects going on here in the United States as we speak, and 2 overseas. The first sale. The United States and a lot of the Western countries have the ability to say to an importer, if there is an intermediary between you and the manufacturer, and that intermediary is taking a commission or a fee, the value declared to customs is the price paid to the factory, excluding the cost of that fee or commission. So the first sale gives a company an option to discount the value declared to customs as the goods come through the border. And it provides huge amount of benefit. Typical commissions overseas range between 10 and 15%. We just did one in which the commission that the intermediary was taking was as much as 50% on the transaction. They're still competitively priced, but we were able to lower their declared values to customers by 50% through an evidentiary process of showing them how that intermediary acts as the middleman. Tariff engineering is a much more complicated subject. It's one of the reasons why we have several engineers on our team, is because what it allows is that a company can adjust how a product is manufactured, what it's made of, okay, how it's made, which would alter its HTS number for the purpose of obtaining a lower duty rate, okay? An example I have at the bottom there is adding felt to the bottom of a sneaker, okay, changes it to a slipper, which comes in a lower duty rate than a sneaker. If you have a lady's garment and you add a pocket into it, into the garment, it actually lowers the duty rate because it has a utilitarian value, okay? And I could go on and on, adding the ability in clothing where you add a component of water resistance to it, changes the HTS number and lowers the duty rate. You go on, slight changes, right? Right now in tariff engineering, because imports into the United States, if we have steel, aluminum, or copper in it, there are surcharges now that you have to pay. But is it not possible to use a different alloy or different material in the manufacturing and still produce a product that can be useful, right? So our engineers are working very hard to try to replace steel, aluminum, and copper, which in many cases there are alternatives that are available, or lessen the percentage of the steel, aluminum, or copper in a product, because when it comes into the United States, it's the percentage of the value of that steel, aluminum, copper that gets reassessed, not the whole product itself. So when we do an assessment, and we look at the freight, which can be a big expense in the supply chain, if we see that a company's spend has more than 5% in air freight as compared to ocean freight, that raises a red flag to us, because you're dealing in a circumstance in which you have air freight costing 18 times more than ocean freight when you look at it as a per kilo, okay, or per cubic meter basis, okay? So when we sit back and say to the company, why do you have 25% of your freight spend in air freight? And they'll say, oh, we have to rush shipments to come out of China, or we have to rush shipments to our client in Italy. And when you dig deeper to find out why are they rushing these shipments and have to use air freight, it comes right back to the demand planning process, that there's faults in the demand planning process. Could be communication issues, could be technology issues. It could be people that aren't talking to each other the way that they need to, okay? It may be misunderstandings between parties, but we clean up the demand planning process to make it run significantly more smoother. And what we try to do is push that 20% back to like around a 4 or 5% number, which is more reasonable. You're always going to have circumstances where you have to rush something along, but it shouldn't be a dominant part of the supply chain. Alternative and near sourcing. This is really primarily started in Trump's first term with some degree of success, but he's pushing very hard now to create opportunities for companies to really think where they manufacture and how they manufacture. So we take this concept and break it down to 3 areas. The first is friendshoring. It's the moving out, particularly of China, from China, and moving it to a country that we have a more friendly relationship with. An example would be South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, okay? Turkey, Mexico would be examples of a friendshoring circumstance. Nearshoring is bringing it closer to the United States, typically Mexico, Canada, or the Caribbean, or maybe Central America might present some options to us. Reshoring is the concept of bringing the manufacturing back to the United States. And these are three different options, particularly in the companies wanting to reduce their dependence on China as an option, or other countries as an option, and what we call diversify their sourcing portfolio. Friendshoring and nearshoring are very valid, legitimate options, do not have too many obstacles in them, and there are lots of countries around the world that we work with. Reshoring, bringing back the manufacturing to the United States, creates a greater challenge because you can appreciate that the overhead costs and the labor costs are significantly higher here than most countries around the world. But the bigger problem in the United States is to get skilled blue-collar labor to be available in the cities and areas around the country that we want to bring back the manufacturing. As an example, we worked with a company in Oklahoma City that about 12 months ago, almost a year ago, we created a foreign trade zone for them where they can do their manufacturing in the foreign trade zone, get tremendous benefits for doing that. They needed 120 people in the factory to keep it running the way they needed it to. But as of the first 7 months, they were still down somewhere between 80 and 90 people in that location. Okay. And you just have the circumstance where that skilled labor is not available, or that we have people who just don't want to work in that area. So we build a program where we're paying off college loans, giving all kinds of engagement stipends to people and so forth. And we now are only missing about 15 positions a year later after we open this place up and put all these benefits out there for people to come in. But it's a difficult thing. Anywhere I take a line across the United States, the Mason-Dixon line, which kind of crosses right through the middle of the country on a horizontal line. North of the Mason-Dixon line, it's very difficult to open up a new manufacturing location and to get enough required labor. South of the Mason-Dixon line, it's a lot easier, which happens to do with the migration patterns of people, particularly who would be considered blue-collar skilled labor. So trying to bring this all together, these options that I've talked about, there are a bunch of options on the one slide, 20 of them, is understanding how resilience and sustainability are achieved. The culture from the top drives the approach. This is managing up, making sure that you have the support of senior management and they're buying into the fact of establishing resilience and sustainability, which general goals that they have an interest in, and more importantly, focusing on the areas where profits can be enhanced, margins can be enhanced, okay, and new sales can be developed and growth can continue to happen for a company. More and more risk management is becoming a greater part of the culture of companies and how they operate their supply chains. And I use that term, which is stop the chasing of cost, but really getting the best value for your spend, okay? So we have as many as 20 solutions. And while I can't cover them all within the context of this presentation, know that they're there. The last slide is my email address. You're welcome to reach out, and there's no costs or obligations, and ask about any of the solutions, how they work. For the Global Chamber, we're willing to give a free 2-hour consultation to any company that want to just have a conversation about what might be available to them. Stop chasing costs and obtain the best value for your spend. I leave with that because that's really a very critical issue in how this all gets done. So I appreciate Doug having us come into this conversation, and I'll take any questions that anybody might have or comments. And you're certainly also welcome to take exception to anything that I said.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. David, you have a number of questions in the chat. Are you available to unmute and ask them directly?
Yeah, sorry about
Dave,
that.
no
Hi,
worries.
how you
David
doing?
Harlow.
Hi, Thomas. How are you doing? Thanks a lot for your presentation. One of the things I saw on one of your slides was manufacturing wasn't allowed in a bonded warehouse. I wanted to double check because maybe there's something because you never hear about manufacturing in a bonded warehouse. I know the regulation supports it, but I was curious if there was any insight there.
Well, it's a very simple thing, is that the term that customs uses actually in in the regulations is there's no manipulation of the product allowed. Okay. So there are things you can do in a bonded warehouse to a product. You can repack it, you can do quality control, you can remark it, you can relabel it, you can test it. Okay. You can bring, a pallet load down to individual transactions. But if it comes in as a widget, it can only go out as a widget. So you can't materially change it.
So
Okay.
even under a class six is for manufacturing in a bonded warehouse.
That's
Right.
a specific class of
Yeah.
bonded warehouse, and it's generally designed for bulk commodities, uh,
Oh, okay.
special products. But the concept, and in most countries around the world, I'll tell you the same thing. Bonded is designed specifically for the
Yeah.
purpose of storage, um, not not manufacturing, and that's why in the United States we call it foreign trade zones, which is a bonded warehouse that allows manipulation in manufacturing, assembly, kitting, and so forth. But around the world, they're generally referred to as free trade zones, where in the United States, we call them foreign trade zones. And
Yeah.
I deal with probably maybe as many as 20, 22 countries where we're involved with their free trade zones. And most of them are set up for the same exact reason, where they're designed to allow manipulation to occur. And the typical example is, a company imports to that country parts and components and raw materials, and then assembles a finished product. And
Great.
I,
Okay. And then the last question I had, as far as manufacturing in a foreign trade zone, I agree with you. It's not the inverted tariff benefit's not allowed, but the activity is still allowed in foreign trade zones, correct?
correct. So a great example would be that if I imported a car, and let's say the car came from Germany and it comes into the United States at 2.5% duty rate, and the car value is 50,000, you have to declare 50,000 to US Customs as it comes into the border. But if you assemble a car in the United States, all the cost of the labor, the overhead, quality control, technology, and value content from the United States is excluded. So if that same car is assembled in the United States, only $25,000 of value is declared, not 50,000, right?
Yeah.
So they're cutting their duty obligation in half by using US labor and location.
Yeah, I agree. Thank
But,
you very much.
Trump only has temporarily stifled the tariff inversion benefit. The intent is for it to come back. And one of the reasons why we're certain he's going to bring it back is that the foreign trade zone is the best model for reshoring to occur.
Yeah,
For
I agree.
to reconsider manufacturing to come back to the United States, the FTZ model is really a perfect model for it. And he knows
So
that.
just an interesting anecdote, we have a client in Peru that's importing Peru source raw materials and components that happen to not be flagged for any tariffs due to exemptions and due to free trade agreements. And so they're using that inverted tariff benefit in an FTZ because there's no tariffs. So they actually still get that benefit, which is nice. But that's probably far and few between. Pretty much everything has a tariff nowadays.
Correct. And it's going to continue because,
Yeah,
Trump is emboldened by the fact that he's got over 100 countries now has lowered their duty rates on US goods. And he's
yeah,
got a significant amount of foreign companies that are now opening factories here and making investments and revigorating that whole part of the supply chain. So it's emboldened him to continue down this path of using tariffs as a weapon in terms of occurring this negotiation. But a lot of people are think it may be reversed because it's being challenged in the Supreme Court, and hearings
yeah,
start in 2 weeks. And
yeah, I agree.
if you read IEPA, which is the International Executive Act that allows the president And the act specifically states that under the president's judgment independently, if he views any circumstance to be a threat to the United States politically, economically, or militarily, he can take independent action without going through the normal protocols and regulatory process of government, the federal government. And so my belief is, and the other parties that we work with in our organization who watch this very carefully, believe that the Supreme Court will come back with the opinion that IEPA was not set up for the purpose of tariffs mitigation or tariff utilization.
Yeah,
But it doesn't say it can't be,
I agree.
right? So
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
it's going to stay, and Mr. Trump is emboldened because the process is working from his perspective. At
Yeah,
everybody else's demise, but at his perspective, it's working.
yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Welcome.
We only have a couple minutes left, and so unless there's a burning question or comment that someone would like to make, we're probably going to need to kind of turn it over to Thomas for some final comments. Does anybody have anything? I know, Robert, you had mentioned something that you wanted to talk about on the semicon. Can you do that in a minute or two?
Absolutely. So, Doug, also, so most people know me as Robert Quinn, the semiconductor industry ambassador and the guy that writes on LinkedIn, but I'm also a part of a company called PartStat. I'm a director at PartStat, and we actually are a free trade 3PL free trade zone company. We have semiconductor vaults within the free trade zone where we store chips for companies, and so we're able to import those chips, uh, store them in the free trade zone in McAllen, Texas, in a semiconductor vault that is it's a halon room, it's EMP proof, it's chips are stored in nitrogen purging cabinets and other ways to prevent degradation of the chips. But we're able to keep those chips there indefinitely for clients that want to keep them for 5, 10, 15 years. We're able to issue 50,000 chips per quarter for them and store those chips for them as well. And if they come in and want to go to Mexico as well, we're able to keep them and store them in the chip vault and then send them to Mexico where there'll be no tariff on those as well. But yeah, it's an interesting product, a solution to being able to these tariffs that we're experiencing right now.
And appreciate that that 3PLs are now getting heavily involved in foreign trade zones, and they're offering those capabilities to their clients. They don't get the benefit of the foreign trade zone, but it makes them a more attractive service provider and warehousing and distribution option. So hats off to you because you thought about that and you're getting that business, which is great.
Yeah. And the greatest thing is that we all know the price of chips is going up. You can essentially, we also work with, we have funds where we're able to purchase the chips from the manufacturer. Then we're able to store those chips and supplies in our vaults. So you're essentially buying tomorrow's chips on today's dollars, knowing that the price of chips is going to go through the roof in the next few years. It's a great opportunity.
Thomas, great presentation. What final comments would you like to make? What would you like to leave us with?
I think the most important, I think there are 3 points. The first is that risk management in the supply chain is the more sophisticated approach that more companies are using. And the subtitle to that is stop chasing cost, and work to get the best value for your spend. Don't try to get something, you're going to spend $1. Don't try to get it for 90 cents. Spend the dollar, but get more for that dollar than you normally would is a better thing. Secondly, is having the ability to pivot as things change is a critical aspect. But the key in my mind to companies being able to pivot is being aware of what your options are and having the resources to support it is very critical. And the third area is just I'm going to call it an attitude and a cultural approach, is that while these are all challenges and they're difficult times and we have more complications today than we ever had, is that it makes our role in companies more important, and there are solutions available and we can look at it as a challenge and we can overcome them if we have the right attitude and approach. So those will be my closing remarks.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. So with a little bit of knowledge, going to the right people, you can solve these issues, can make informed decisions that save money. And I like that idea where really these folks, the folks that you assist at these companies are more important than ever. And that's gives them the spotlight. Foreign trade, one of the things that has always frustrated me, and one of the reasons why I started Global Chamber was that, like, not only does less than 1 out of 100 companies export, but even in those companies, the people that are doing foreign business very often are out of the loop, out of the ring of power. International historically has never been in the U.S. companies very important, quite honestly, and so it's very important now. That not only is the opportunity, as it always has been, fantastic, but the opportunity has increased, the challenges have increased, the opportunity has increased, and the spotlight has increased. So, Thomas, thank you for not shrinking in the spotlight, but growing in the spotlight and helping so many people be successful. Thank you for the conversation today.
You're welcome. Everybody be safe and well.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. The next conversation we'll have on trade, we have, I think, 4 meetings tomorrow, and then a few meetings on Thursday. And one of those is our Export-Import Forum with Bill Edwards. 50 years of trade experience. He'll be talking about non-tariff barriers. And I think if you enjoyed today, you'll enjoy Thursday as well. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye now.
Cheers.